Alrighty. And clickety clacks and so forth and so on. And we're just starting up the show at the very last minute. My due apologies. There's Peter's neat little logo, and therein is our Troubles in Paradise. Hi, I'm James Downard, RJ, tortucanwordpress.com, my website. Please make use of, etc., so forth and so on. And we will stop sharing, and we can now shut that little puppy down. Oh, hi, Clade. And Scratch. Yeah, I duly apologize for the clumsiness of today's opening, because I was just catching up on all the stuff from being away from things for almost a week with my family over in Seattle, and I've been catching up on all the material. But we're still floating around and continuing the process of dissecting contested bones. We have now moved into a new taxon, Australopithecus sediba. Which is a bunch from about 2 million years ago. And it was a really neat stir because it was a fairly complete fossil, although fragmentary in bits and pieces. But when you got one half of a bone, you got the other half implied by that and so forth. So it was really quite a remarkable find. Needless to say, what was delightful for science, expanding the range of those fuzzy little australopithecines and trying to figure out what was going on in that period leading up into the first arrival of Homo erectus. And it showed how much more varied the australopithecines were, even though we already knew they had robust australopithecines and others, and they had found out more and more about bipedality and all that amongst the group. So this put in a new player on the scene, and there was now some open question as to whether we needed Homo habilis as the transition, or whether Australopithecus sediba is actually the branching group, because they all were showing mosaic features. And some of the papers, remember, I always try to link off information that's open access, not just an abstract. That's the coward's way out. So I put some material that has been cited by our Sanford book, and which you can read as well. The Berger 2012 summary is really nice because he goes into all the different candidates. He refers to them, of course, by their standard paleontology names rather than their popular noting. So talking about 0872 and all that kind of stuff, or 62 in terms of the bones, but you can check out the details on that. But anyway, the Berger one was really quite interesting. And there's also a New Scientist posting that's a nice general summary. It's got an image of the endocast, the brain cast of a sediba. And from what I can tell so far from flipping through the Sanford book, they don't discuss the brain endocasts at all. It just leave that one out. And then the Pickering paper, which is another very nice analysis of the forensic details. So you can all check out those and find out all the stuff that isn't there. Again, I apologize for the slowness and the tardiness of getting off of the thing. So I wasn't able to put any links out to everybody just until the very last minute. I see some other people have joined in, Brian and AJS, and thank you all. We're continuing on about that. The intriguing Engage Paragon. So what you're saying is that the creationists in this book are really doing a continuously boring process of shuffleboarding the data field to arrive at the conclusion that they've already insisted on being true, which is Australopithecines are all just apes. They're just chimpanzee-ish, ape-ish. And then you've got a no man's land, and then suddenly you've got human beings, and everything else is on that side. So Neanderthals are human beings, and Homo habilis is, they don't really think too much about that, but if they are, they're either apes or human beings. And so it's all that bifurcation aspect. And the fun part is finding out all the data leave out. Part of the problem that I think creationists have is that they are thinking saltationally, that suddenly something is going to go boop, and there's the full-blown human being all in one thing. Like, why aren't apes turning into people? You get that a lot on a lot of the Twitter feeds, which is just ridiculous. But what has we've been seeing in evolution generally is the mosaic issue, that character states don't pop up all at once. They get a little here, and then they add on another one, and then they add on another one, and they add on another one. So you get things that are mosaic characters. Archaeopteryx is a classic example of that. that it's very bird-like in many ways, but yet also dinosaurian in other ways. It still retained its dinosaur tail and its gastralia, doesn't yet have a bird sternum, and so it's a, air quotes, mosaic feature. But that's what transitionals would do in the real world. The other factor that if you read my piece, and please read my piece, that's why I put this stuff up. The Planet of the Apes chapter at TIP. I'll put the website up there again so everybody can make a point of it. That's functionally a book-length work, all for free, which will cover the history of human evolution issues and how creationists have done, date around 2004. And although there are an awful lot of new fossils like these sediba things, the overall picture is still the case that the older view of evolution was a ladder of progress where one form would turn into another and disappear so that the new form was there. So you had a nice steady progress up to Neanderthals and then Cro-Magnons and then human beings. And that meant that the earlier forms had disappeared because they had turned into us. That's the old sympatric model of evolution, which does occur in individual cases, but is way less relevant than allopatric species diversification bits, where A will spawn off a new species B, and A doesn't disappear, it stays going. So there's a huge amount of overlap between one species and its cousin species for a long time. The original one may in fact outlast some of its cousins in varying environments. And that really started to kick in, that change in perspective, by the 1990s. And now it's just part of the standard procedure. But I think creationists are still stuck in that 1970s single species model approach to things that makes them very hard to assess all of this glut of information where they're going, well, it's got to be an ape or a person. It can't be something in between, which again goes on to the other factor that I've been waiting for Sanford and Rupi to ever explain what they would accept. What would a transitional form need to look like? You don't like this one, you don't like that one. Well, what would need to alter? How would the bone need to look? That's something no anti-evolutionist ever does. Let's see what's going on. Since I don't have anybody else in the room there, Jackson Wheat, by the way, is in school today, so he couldn't show up. And I was getting this thing going so late that I haven't put the linkage out to anybody. So I'm on my own. Yes, I'll look at some of the comments on here. Brian put up a link there on the basics on endocasts from Columbia. Endocasts are really wonderful. And in fact, it's moved beyond just endocasts because a lot of old fossil data is being reevaluated because it was so poor. Things that were crushed skulls. Well, you can use computer modeling to pull back and reconstruct the original shape of things based on the forensic of how things compact. And the endocast, of course, the brain itself is not preserved. It's the bumps on the skull that's preserved. And from that, you can infer, because brains don't occur magically, they occur by developmental processes, that they tell an awful lot about things. We know that the Wernicke's area and Brokaw's area that play a role in our language systems first show up indisputably in Homo habilis. And I don't know in the details yet, because I'll have to check through and see whether they bump into it much, what the circumstances are for those two brain systems regarding a sediba. That I'll have to put on my little, must need to check into that. Find out whether those are present in there, because since they do have the brain endocast. And we've got a side discussion there going on hermaphrodism in frogs and poodles turning into dogs or dogs into poodles, either way. I put links up, by the way, in my shameless plug department to Evolution Slam Dunk and also to my debate with Kent Hovind. I put a little jab at Jackson Wheat because his debate with Kent Hovind has now got more viewers than I have, because he's got it in 2 posts and they're ahead of me. So I'm jealous. I'll chalk it up to the fact that I'm an old fart and I'm not as photogenic and charming as Jackson is, and so I'm coming across as the talking skull in there. But nevertheless, pass the word around on that, because I'm very proud of how I use source methods on dismantling Kent Hovind. I got another debate scheduled for next week with Standing for Truth, who is a young Earth creationist, I think. We'll find out whether we can figure out what it is he thinks. He's commented occasionally on some of the videos, so he's popped up a little bit. I haven't seen a great deal on it. He was trotting out Sanford's genetic entropy argument in some of his comments, although he didn't want to explore that. So we'll having that discussion. That's also hosted by Modern Day Hysteria. We're still wrangling over what the topic will be, because I think the creationist wants to reframe it so he gets to be the positive, so he gets to go first. But I'm still playing my little game on that. Anyway, so I hope you'll check out some of that material on Australopithecus sediba and put it on your blips on the scope. You want to bear in mind, this is in that interesting period of about 2 million years ago, when there were still varying Australopithecines going on, and it's before you start getting the indisputable groups of the Homo erectus gang, and even that isn't necessarily a single species. There's a possibility of fissioning species off, and of course from there on, when you're getting down to about 600,000 years ago, you're starting the branching off to Neanderthal, and then about 300,000 years later, apparently the human species that's branching off from an African group. So it's fun going on. And by Homo erectus, of course, you've got a group that's spreading all through Asia. So it's now out of Africa. The old arguments, again, this is a discussion that's kind of dated now, which was just an arm fight between people over the out of Africa versus the multi-regional model. And in a way, it's become irrelevant, because there's been so much new information on the field that we can argue that both of them were right and both of them were misleading. Is that there's definite gene flow in population groups that have formed somewhat separate species along the way, and you got the Denisovans and all that. We got their literal DNA to look at now. At the same time, you still have Africa as the cradle of these repeated population surges and gene flows out of Africa, and that pulsing based upon climate issues, based upon the accessibility of the North Africa part. They're finding that there's human beings up in that area too, that they hadn't realized that the hominids had gotten into that zone. And a lot of it's hard to get to because it's deserty. And also there's a lot of regimes where you really aren't comfortable digging anywhere, Libya and a lot of these other places. So it makes things complicated. In the same way that archaeology at Mount Ararat is awkward because it's near the Russian border. And so you get people not liking to get close to all that. Anyway, Clade says that Standing for Truth's channel looks like an amazing journey into batshit crazy. Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah, well, I can deal with batshit crazy. I'll be wanting to explore with him the ideas on nomenclature, about the data field, his source methods, and of course I'll be defending mine, and try to wriggle that into a debate context. I haven't even gotten specifics yet about the format, so we may be winging it on that one. I'm also going to be doing some discussions. I put a posting up, not here, but on the YouTube that Gunter Beckley did, that Denise O'Leary had linked to. He had been interviewed a week or so ago, and I was spending my time researching that while I was on vacation, and put some various comments up on it at that site. And if anyone's curious about it, I can give the linkage to it floating around, I guess. Let me see where I'm at here. I'll look like a complete idiot here as I'm flipping along. And can I find, there we go. I'll put a link into that debate because I put comments in on it that I thought were relevant. I looked up all of the sources that he was sort of relying on, but never bothered to link to. I complained, in fact, about that in the video, that this is 2018. You should be putting the links up to any relevant technical literature, unless, of course, they're umpteen long. But nevertheless, at least the highlights should be put up. That's the Beckley video that I just put up on there. And I broke it up into about 6 different comments that delved into, frankly, in some cases, his misuse of the sources. Why is he bringing some of these subjects up? One where he was clearly wrong on the horizontal tooth formation, where he was implying that this was somehow incredibly similar and therefore convergence couldn't be an argument. No, they're not incredibly similar. They're very dissimilar systems that happen to be called horizontal tooth displacement in manatees and elephants and the like, and they're not the same thing. There are very different mechanisms involved. And so I was putting that stuff up, and apparently it relies on Wikipedia and that. But anyway, I'll be covering more on that next week. And that'll be a somewhat truncated show as well, because I'll be immediately making sure that I don't go past 6 o'clock, because I've got to have enough time to be able to get on to the debate with Standing for Truth, which would be supposedly hitting in about a half hour after that. So that'll be interesting, because I'll want to continue to present that source methods approach at the same time as defending what the evidence is, explaining why I believe in evolution and the arguments. I'll clearly be dealing with the reptile-mammal transition, and will presumably be banding back and forth over whatever issues he brings up. We'll find out. Let's see what we've got going in here. Brian, it's an excellent point about the fact physics is your wheelhouse, but I love learning anything. That's a phenomenon that I think I'm trying to instill in everybody. I have a BA in history. I'm not technically trained in that respect, but I have no compunction to not learn about stuff. And if you read the material and understand the nomenclature and figure out what's going on, you can grapple with it. Science is the delightful field where everything is accessible. It may not be instantly easy to deal with, but it's all accessible. And you can work your way up through the food chain of getting good summary articles, frankly, annual reviews. There's a whole series of annual reviews of physics and annual reviews of biology and so forth and so on. And there's an awful lot of those journals available. And they're technically proficient ones, but they're also general summary pieces, and usually chock-a-block these days with gorgeous illustrations that were explaining the nitty-gritty on it. There's wonderful stuff on the reptile-mammal transition and every biological subject that you can imagine. So more and more of that is becoming directly accessible freebie. So you can dive into it and explore. Pick an area that you like, that you're interested in anyway, so you don't have to hit yourself with a hammer to prod yourself into doing it, and then run with it. See who the players are, who the various protagonists are. If you're particularly motivated, if you're watching this show, you probably are particularly motivated to take on creationists in whatever venues you're in, on Facebook or Twitter or wherever. That's another area where find out what they think about these things. Do they bump into the data field that you're aware of? If so, pay attention to that and look to see what arguments they present up. In any case, when you're looking at anybody's argument, follow up on the sources. Functionally, I'm doing source methods analysis whenever I'm doing research, because you're looking at a technical paper and it mentions a particular point where you go, ooh, that's interesting. And so you look at the source they offer. And if you discover that that source is not really saying what they claim it does, that's a giant warning flag. You don't encounter that very often, even in people who are steadfast defenders of particular positions in debates like that old out of Africa versus multi-regional model. They're still playing fair with their source material. When you move over to anti-evolutionism, though, and any dogmatic belief that's not true, oh, never mind that they got footnotes. They're playing fast and loose with footnoting. That the sources don't necessarily claim what they do. They sometimes directly contradict the material. Always beware if a really old source is used. And that's another reason why I'm trying to wean people away from older material, that try to catch up with the data field. So if you have a posting that's referring to a 1990s article, holy cow, that's old in genetics terms. It doesn't mean that it's a wrong article, but boy, there's probably been work done on that since. So track down and find out what the cutting edge is. And what I've been trying to do in my tip work, which is time consuming, being I'm a one-man band, functionally doing all of this without any assistance. And I will eventually need to have a replacement for me somewhere down the road so that the work can continue. I want this to be an ongoing project. But you can get up to speed on these things as much as possible. And it puts you on the high ground. If you're on the cutting edge, always beware, though, in dealing with cutting edge, is that dust needs to settle. So don't overplay the latest paper. Take a look at it, keep modifying and looking at how it fits into the field, see what criticisms or not are offered on it. So usually it's a matter that if it's had a chance to settle for a while, like a couple years, and it's now being cited by new work, that's a nice, good field. So you want to get that lay of the land on the scientific field, and the same principles then apply if you're dealing with historical subjects, if you're dealing with archaeology of the Bible, which I was spending time on earlier today, which is the reason why I've been delayed in getting online and getting the thing set up. Bad dog, bad Jimmy, researching too much. And it's a general procedure. Yeah, Brian points out the point that things that you're attracted naturally to things with direct mathematics, and there are lots of areas in population genetics and others that are just chock about with formula. And in that respect, since you would be not uncomfortable with summation signs and all that, you'd actually be at an advantage in analyzing technical papers that go into those sorts of areas, where I am much more of a clumsy, having to follow through very carefully to figure out what's going on. So everybody can make use of their skill set. My forte in particular is that source citation level, to see who's citing what material are they drawing on, what material they aren't, how they're intersecting the data field. And now that I'm at the position that I'm measuring that, which is the whole point of the TIP project, is to get that whole field out of the way. It improves my understanding of the subject. It also affords a better opportunity to poke at the opponents of evolution, because you'll not only have a sense of what the data field is, but also what their sense of the data field is. And all the material that I've been doing in a way of altering the temporary focus of TIP to doing standalone books that can get a revenue stream that can help me do a little better. And this has been actually quite a good month for sales on that. Remember, great holiday gift for yourself or others, Evolution Slam Dunk. And also, if you want the fiction side of things, The Paralogs of Phileas Fogg is a novel. Christmas time, holiday gift giving, Hanukkah, anything else, Kwanzaa, do what one will. That can be a good little operation going. So I'll be monitoring my book sales to see whether or not we can get some stuff on that. Anyway, Brian, you bring up another good point about the point about being careful about what you first read, that you can easily tumble onto a work that may or may not be representative of the field. It can be recent, it could be old. And you want to find out, you're in a little better shape if there's lots of authors. If it's an individual work by an individual scientist, odds are that it's reflecting more their particular viewpoint. They may be really reliable or not. Without researching, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So it's a matter of finding out about the provenance of the people, as well as just the words they're talking about. And that takes time. It's just a matter of working through things. Another area, and don't denigrate it, as a handy little doorway, and is silly Wikipedia, because Wikipedia will give you a sense of the general consensus of things, the general viewpoint. That doesn't mean it's cast in stone, but it will give you some lead-ins to some of the major works in the field, and that can allow you to peg down and find out who the players are, and find out what reputations they are, and whether or not there are particular cliques of opinion, if there's controversies or not. All of that is something that's just part of the game in any area. It's not unique to science at all. Yeah, Brian, thank you, Brian. Says, I will quote you here. Is one of the reasons I respect RJ, the source methodology is one of the best I've ever seen, ever. Thank you. I'm really trying to embody the principles of the thing, that you are never going to get into trouble by over-researching a subject, by investigating all the players and being always scrupulously fair with the source material. It keeps you from overplaying your hand. I try to warn people in a lot of issues where they're wading into areas that are just quagmires. Origins of life, abiogenesis is just an area that you need to be really up on your game if you're going to dive into that, because the short form is that we haven't figured out how life originated yet. We got oodles of clues, and way more is known today than 10, 15 years ago. But nobody can say, boop, 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 it's all nice and settled. in the way that the reptile-mammal transition is settled, or other areas like mitochondrial endosymbiosis and these things that are just part of the standard repertoire. So knowing those differing fields is just part of the game. And always be super aware of the difference between a primary and a secondary source. Richard Dawkins is often very detailed in his books, but he's a secondary source. And the technical literature is the primary source. Most of it's available now. You might get used to hitting some of the major journal magazines in a particular area that interests you. Certainly Science, Nature, and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences are biggies, because you'll get a really broad range of the current cutting-edge technical literature from just those three. And then you can specialize and focus on other things. Old Scratch, PZ Myers just put out a great discussion on YouTube on biogenesis. Yeah, there's an awful lot that could be said about it. I mean, I don't shy away from the subject myself. I put a few postings up on it myself. I just argue that you got to be very wary in implying that it's a done deal when it isn't. And also that it's an area that doesn't change any of the data later. That nothing about how life originated makes the reptile-mammal transition go away, or makes Tiktaalik go away, or it makes the transitional feather form that we found in amber in the Mesozoic go away. None of that changes. And so the idea that if you're going into a abiogenesis discussion with an origins or buster who wants to drag you away from the settled to the big question mark areas, be wary of that and bear that in mind. That they're trying to ask, well, where did life come from? As a way to derail the debate away from the stuff that, well, we know how this happened, and we know how this happened, and we know how this happened. And they're often using it as that dodge. You can go even farther back to why the universe existed in the Big Bang. You'll find intelligent design advocates going after that issue. And that now has dragged you back before the Earth by 10 billion years. I mean, whoa, that's a long way away from why there are ALUs in our genome. And so reflecting how these kind of debates can throw everybody off is a part of the game of not falling into traps on things, to be well versed and interested in. Abiogenesis subjects are really neat. And you can point out that most of the people who are critical of abiogenesis arguments are not people who do the work. They're secondary redactors. They're anti-evolutionists scavenging through the literature. At the relatively small number of people, there are probably half a dozen teams of people that all together you could probably put in a meeting room at the Holiday Inn and have some room left over. It's not a gigantic block of people that are doing that. It's a niche market that's hard to do, and there's not a great deal of money in it. So it's not like the well-funded genetics work on why diseases are the way they are. There's tons of stuff there, and there's money to be made there. But if you're doing abiogenesis research, you just want to know what the facts are. You're trying to find out what went on billions of years ago. And so it's a much more limited market. Yeah, Frustrated Atheist says abiogenesis is a very muddled area right now, but we have a good understanding on how it could have happened. Yeah, I'll do a little short preface of my position on the subject. Is first of all, we know the basics is that life did not start out with lions and tigers and bears, oh my, that it started out as bacteria. It did not involve cyanobacteria. It didn't involve photosynthesis. That you have some benchmarks on LUCA, which I'll put that in the little thing here. LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. You can Google all of that and find out stuff on there. LUCA is the retro concept of the minimum basic organism from which all current life on Earth will have been descended. And so there's a repertoire of, there's like a couple hundred genes involved, and then there's like 60 particular core units ones, and there's variations of them in various organisms, but that's kind of the thing there. And so that gives you a ballpark, but that's not the origin of life. That's probably several hundred million years maybe after the things that led up to LUCA. And so you have issues. I'm very much a metabolism firster, that metabolism had to have originated before replication. The replicator, I'm reasonably confident that it was an RNA replicator or possibly building off of even some precursor PNA mode, but definitely RNA was a player. And it was soon superseded by the parasite, which is DNA. DNA, which has a nice reliability that RNA doesn't. It doesn't have the catalytic features, but once you have a replicator, the DNA can hitchhike on that. And then trying to figure out what was doing that. There probably were fewer amino acids involved. There was a smaller data set, so there were duplexes rather than triplexes. And then for me, one of the big areas that intrigues me, and there's very little work yet done on the evolutionary origins of it, so that's one of my big question mark issues, is error correction systems. And there are a bunch. They keep on finding new little tricks that the cells use to detect and correct mutations. Well, they can't correct everything because without mutations, you don't have evolution. So it's a delicious little dance between replicating with great fidelity and replicating with reasonable fidelity. There's the error catastrophe issue. And so all of those stuff, error catastrophe, which is too many mutations and your replicator falls apart. Not enough mutations and it doesn't do anything. So it's that neat little mode that they have to figure out what was going on in something that isn't yet LUCA. And that's a fascinating area that has to be done by point-by-point experiments and working out things involving membranes and metabolic cycles and tons of stuff. I've got a little cashew knocking around in my teeth if you're wondering why. I'm sorry, I'm an old fart. I just have all of these difficulties, which is probably why fewer people have seen my debate than the one with the more photogenic Jackson wheat. Anyway, if you've got a link on that, stick that thing in on the PC Myers debate because or discussion on abiogenesis, because it's all fun to deal with. Immutable Destiny asked, metabolism first may well be true, but it would rely on lipid first chemistry to protect and allow selective permutation of molecules for metabolism. That's a very good point. Yeah. The idea that you have to have some way of segregating the components so they can do their component-y things. And if it's just an undifferentiated blob, odds are that natural processes and thermal phenomenon and sea mixing and a whole bunch of other things, if you're talking about a geothermal vent or if it's stuff in the warm little pond near the surface, is going to be working against that. That's a very good point on that. So it's a delicious synergy of factors that they have to kind of think through and work. There's two ways of going about the abiogenesis problem. And one is going from current metabolism backwards, and that can get you at least to LUCA. The other is from pure abiogenesis forward, and that you're running kind of in unclear because you have to reconstruct as accurately as possible a completely prebiotic environment. And how much do you need? How big? Do you need a vat the size of Connecticut? You need to let the experiment run for 100,000 years or not? All of these are still open questions. And they make things really, really fun. I've dithered along now past the half hour, so let me put in my shameless plug and my patrons discussion in here. Let me go back into the exciting world of old fart attempts to do screen share. There we go. And the infinite regress. There are my patrons, and it's a slowly growing group, even though I don't actually get the money much because of the peculiarities of Patreon. So I always put the GoFundMe.com DC go much bigger print. But we've got Stephen and Mary Gale and Keith and Dyer and Andrew and Eat Neil and Yui and Mona and Henril and Jen B and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Nyanya. I love Nyanya. Bo Hobo from far away in Scandinavia, and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex and Sun Sky Stone and Cirrus, who's helping me record the audiobook for the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, and eventually then I'll be doing an audiobook for Evolution Slam Dunk, which will be a trickier thing to do, but I know the author. I can persuade him to do the rewrites. Todes Real and Everett Vincents and Sewer and Paul Williams. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Even if the money isn't actually filtering to me because of Patreon, nonetheless, you put your money on the line and are supporting the project and saying, hey, thumbs up, boop. And so I am most mindful of all of that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So there's the shameless plug thing. We continue with our discussions. Let's see what else is going on here. Oh, let me get up. I'll try to, whoops, things slip up here. Let me try to copy my link address, and I'll put that in my own field, and I'll try to get at that later. Copy. And then on abiogenesis. And we'll see what we can do on that one. Yeah, I always like to look at things because, for one thing, I'll be interested to see if he might be mentioning particular technical literature that I wasn't aware of. I try to keep up on the field, but it's a varied field, and it's in a bunch of different journals. And I can guarantee you, I track altogether some 1,900 technical journals that I've been bumping into, and it's physically impossible to monitor every bloody one of those. There's not enough time in the day. You'd have to have a giant staff to do that, and I don't have that. We're talking about where people are come. Atheist Comedy Center brings up Nick Lane, claims to have an alkali hydrothermal vent, not just any hydrothermal vent, in order to get energy usage to work. Yeah, there's been an awful lot of really interesting work about hydrothermal vents. And again, it involves what constituents are involved. Where they found out when they put in phosphorus, kaboom, they were getting particular nucleobases that were really hard to biosynthesize before. And suddenly they're going, boop, it's easy peasy. So it's a matter of getting the combination right. Remember, nature is deliciously brainless and relentlessly makes use of whatever is around. And if you've got lots and lots of things happening in lots of different microenvironments on a whole planet, what are the odds that in one or two places, the right combinations are going to hit up? And once those do, once you have a replicator operating in a metabolically sustained environment with a segregated lipid structure, then nothing will stop it. And they're we're off to the races. It's still uncertain whether life originated as a single system or whether there were multiple things. It's also not clear, although my prejudices are that an RNA DNA system is probably the easiest default mode. And that's the one that's going to kick off because it's the one that can work out easiest. In that case, it would be the case that if life exists elsewhere in the universe, it's always going to be RNA DNA because it's the only one that'll really work. But we don't know enough about it to be able to be absolutely sure about that. The part of the romantic in me would like to go for a silicon-based organism, although tiny amounts of water are a problem. Mars is too wet for a silicon-based organism. It turns into silicates and just disintegrates, which again would involve that complex thing about membranes and that to be able to protect against that. Ammonia can theoretically function as a moderator the way water does, but only under very high pressures. And that may be a problem for other things. So my gut suspicion is water-based, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, the little Trump acronym that's used, and that RNA, DNA are the elements of choice. And the RNA, which now functions like a kind of sneaky parasite, was originally the original main player, and the DNA, which is now the backbone system, is so deliciously stable and effective, but it can't replicate easily on its own. Doesn't act as an autocatalyst. Has ended up being the dominant unit for the information storage, but all the business ends going on at the RNA level. So your ribosome and all that's the core of that's an RNA molecule. And those are the clues. And none of that was known if you jump back to when I was younger in the 1960s. So do we know more about abiogenesis than we did back then? Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. We're able to ask much more sophisticated questions. Mutable destiny brings up a thing about nucleotides would be selected for based upon the relative activity of metabolism and the proteins handling that. Another really intriguing question, and it's still open-ended, is why the association between particular nucleotides and particular amino acids. And it looks like there's some structural reason why those affinities have occurred in the way that they did, and probably a little easier once they realized that it would have been a smaller set of amino acids involved initially in a duplex system, and why the duplex system get involved. So there's a bunch of little, how did that happen? Questions to that are the still unresolved ones. And it's another reason for being very wary in diving into origins or bust issues, because there's still work in progress on there. AJS says, could you see some silicon thing existing on Mercury? Silicon is the next most reactive element to carbon. Yeah, it's a tantalizing idea. In the same way that in the Andromeda Strain, Michael Crichton's novel that was turned into one of my favorite science fiction films, don't watch the TV remake, watch the Robert Wise movie from 1970. Delicious movie. The idea of a completely non-amino acid-based organism that was built from basic stuff, but not, it's in a crystal form. And whether or not anything like that can occur, can you have radically different replicator structures than what we're used to in the life as we know it? And we don't know that. Oh, yes, AJS, Andromeda Strain. Yes, I adore that movie. It's got a delicious cast. It's got a clever score. It's one of my favorites because scientists make mistakes in it, that they make reasonable decisions based on what they knew at the time, that they go, and they have to correct themselves. It's very much about the scientific method. It was hyper accurate in terms of the technology at the time. All the gizmos they're using are real equipment, from the electron microscopes and all the rest. And Paula Kelly, who's drop dead gorgeous, I adore her. She did relatively few movies, but she's just wonderful to look at. She plays the nurse in the wildfire complex. For those of you who have no idea what the hell we're talking about, the Andromeda Strain, 1970 science fiction film about an alien organism that is accidentally gets loose on Earth for reasons I won't tell you too much about, because those are spoiler alerts. It has a pile-up cast of Canadian actors. Almost everybody in it is from Canada originally, and so I think they probably got a budget constraint going there, although most of it's filmed down in Nevada and various other places. And it's got a little political edge to it. About this was during the Nixon administration, and so there were some jabs at scientific illiteracy in the Republican administration. I know we can't imagine anything like that today in a Republican administration, but believe it or not, the Nixon administration is like a pile of science genius compared to what we've got in the current one. Anyway, yeah, it's a well-recommended movie to get. I don't think it's been out on Blu-ray yet, but it is available out on DVD. And it's, when I think of like the 601 error and anybody who's seen the movie will know what the hell I'm referring to in that little sound effect that was used. It's an all electronic score, which is kind of funky. And the whole wildfire complex, it was deliciously well designed. It's an entirely satisfying movie. There I just went berserk on a long digression on the Andromeda Strain movie. Yeah, all of the side comments are very, very relevant. We've got a whole bunch of delicious geek moments about the whole issue of what can bond with what chemistry can do, where we, to some extent, have to peel away what is now common in living organisms to look back retroengineering wise, paleogenomically, to see what's possible before that system kicks in as the default one. And so it's an exciting and interesting field, and some of the most fascinating work, the chirality issue, why we use particular left or right-handed molecules in certain contexts, and how much of that was dictated by just the dynamics of the system, and how much of it was just fluke, and could other biologies have developed, and origins of life work spills over into exobiology, because in order to figure out what might be possible on alien planets, you've got to work out what is possible in terms of living systems. AJ said, that's why I missed the after show. We had great conversations about old movies. Yeah, well, I try to dive into that in other contexts, and perhaps we should do, anybody who wants can invite me into old movie geek out moments. We should actually do that. I kind of wanted to keep Evolution Hour restricted to just that, and I have so much on my plate that I don't typically do just standalone videos anymore. It's all within that Evolution Hour context in that. But yeah, I'm open, easy peasy, to have a geek out show on just discussing science fictions or anything else that's of interest as just a standalone thing. So put me in an invite on Twitter and set up a thing, and I'm ready to go. Immutable Destiny says, would a silicon and something else based life form work? We don't know. there are constraints involved. The one thing that makes carbon so useful is that it forms very nice bonds, but they also can be broken without applying a lot of energy to them. And that's the problem with silicon, that silicates form, and boy, that oxygen atom just, and it's not as wiggly as the carbon base. Then it also asks, do you think it would be plausible that the first proteins were very short and operated in rocks, as geochemistry provides very tight packing and limited entry for water? Yeah, moralite is the element of choice there. Let me type that in here, that you can go some Google on that. Moral. Hopefully I'm spelling it correctly. Moralite, and it may be something like that. I don't have my bibliography open to look on, but there's been quite a lot of work over the years. It's a clay form, and it really is very biomolecule friendly. And there's a lot of suspicions that not so much rock, but these clays act as useful substrates for some prebiotic chemistry. Atheist Comedy Center says silicon is just too inert in its stable compounds and dissolves in too little. So no, silicon will never be a major basis for life. That's what I suspect too. But boy, the romantic in me would find it interesting to imagine that there's some, in some peculiar and unusual set of circumstances, that a silicon-based organism actually would work. I'm not holding my breath on it, but it's an intriguing thing. And the whole point of exploring these possibilities, like ammonia instead of water, makes you rethink what it means to be a metabolite, what it means to be a biophysical system. And one of the things that's still very uncertain is that we don't really have a kind of rigorously obvious conception of what it means to be a metabolism. That we've got examples of it up the yin-yang, but trying to work out a kind of a general principle thing, going back to Brian Stevens and your love of formulas and the physics things, to try to have a generic the equivalent of E equal mc square, or the kinds of things, force equal mass times acceleration, any of those kinds of generic modelings of what a metabolism does. We're still in the baby steps area. And obviously one of the problems in working that out is that we only have one example. If we had found, for example, life on Mars, and it was radically different, or if we can find life on the oceans of Europa or something like that, to find out that it's got significantly different biochemistries than what we're used to, and involves different moderators and other things, well, that's a gold mine. That would be spectacular, because now you can compare systems and look at what's common and what is different between them, and that jump starts the knowledge. But we don't have that. Everything's got to be retroengineered. AGS 50 years ago, they would have said that hot smoker worms or Antarctic ice fish would have been impossible. Exactly. And that's why old farts like me, who can remember back to the study, I never took biology in high school. I took chemistry and physics because I didn't want to dissect frogs. And in a way, I'm kind of glad I didn't, because the science, the evolution data that I would have gotten in the textbook of 1969 would be before most of what we know now. So it would have been based on stuff from the 1950s. It would have been a filtered down version of what is now very misleading material. Just within my own lifetime, plate tectonics came along in the 1970s. They discovered homeobox genes only in the 1990s. There have been just vast revolutions in our conceptions of things. And I never dreamed that I would live to the day when we could say, oh, here's a list of the exoplanets that we can see with our space telescopes. Whoa. That was something absolute. To know that there's planets around Alpha Centauri, that was completely speculative when I was a kid. So all of you who are listening to me or talking to people, get up and go, wow, it's amazing the world that we live in, that the science progress that's been taking place is just gobsmacking. And that's what makes the existence of creationists and flat earthers and that all the more annoying, because holy smokes, you have no excuse for this. No. Way too much is known. Immutable destiny. Are there ideas as to potential candidates for electron carriers in prebiotic chemistry? That's the one that I'm not entirely clear on myself. So I'll have to kind of keep that in mind. The shuffling, all of life involves the shuffling of things at electron stage. When you rub your fingers on your desk, you're not actually touching the matter of the desk or your fingers. You're getting scrapey electron shell manipulations. And the ability to juggle those electrons and the ability to alter and maneuver particular atoms back and forth, that gets into some complex things like the calcium atoms that we use for our brain chemistry and all that. The interesting question is, are those the only things that will work? Or are they the ones that got settled on because they work well enough? Are there better ones? We do know that there are experimental work on adding on additional amino acids, a 6 codon genetic system, that they can find that there are some biological systems that are actually more efficient artificially ones that nature never hit on, apparently. Or if it did, it at the moment wasn't as convenient as the Model T kludgy system that we end up with. And that's the other continuing issue in the whole, particularly in the development of phyla in the Cambrian, is how much are things the short-term useful versus long-term evolvability. And so the ones that may have a run of 50, 100 million years, but in the long run, they've got some problems that make them less resilient, less evolvable than their competitors. And so that's why most of the animal phyla that you see in the Cambrian, all those proliferation of bugs, are extinct, because they maybe didn't have the evolvability factor. And those are very, very much interesting theoretical questions that nag at a whole bunch of issues about how convergence comes up in biology and all that. Anyway, let me get some. Brian, what is that link for ID? Let me. I'll put that in my. I'll copy that little thing off and put that in there. I'll have to check up on all this, because I shut down a lot of the systems when I'm working on this show, because I've got a limited amount of computer space, and I've noticed that it would sometimes be a problem. Or whoops, we got going there. Oh, that's not right. That's, oh yeah, I guess that is okay. I have to shut things down. I shut down Twitter and anything else that's going to act as memory hogs. And maybe in future, someday I'll be able to get more professional and all the rest. Ideally, in the long term, here's a hopa thing. I'd love to hitch up with somebody who can handle a lot of the grunt work of the shows, to where they can handle the visuals and all of that, and act as kind of like the host moderator. And then I can run off on things, and they can have somebody who more officially pays attention to stuff, that we can have a better graphic, that instead of just seeing the den behind me, that they do like Peter does, that has like a room that operates in, and then being able to pull up visuals and graphics and all of that. That's a long term down the road. But at the moment, everything is all, I'm amazed that I'm able to do this. You know, the chess playing dog, I only win a third of my games. Oh, yeah, thank you. Brian Stevens, the link he put up there is for electron carriers in prebiotic chemistry. And I'll be looking through all of that to see whether or not it's in my bibliography, and to make sure if it isn't, to put that in, so that I'm always keeping up to speed on stuff. Because even though I may be slow on the uptake in firing back on stuff, if I can't remember exactly which one it is, and sometimes I have to hunt around to find, the easiest material that I have is the stuff that I've collated and organized. And I think everybody finds that the case. So that's why I'm very happy with the postings that I have put up at TIP, and then the more recent material with Evolution Slam Dunk on that. It allows you to pull all of the disparate threads together and get the material up to speed, and ideally being very, very recent and bulletproof, so that then anybody getting that work will have a higher level stepping stone to work off of. And one thing I'm trying to help contribute is to speed up the process, that too much of what goes on in pushing back at, whether it's creationists or anti-vaxxers or people in policy matters in government, is that too many people, if you have to spend so much time reinventing the wheel and catching up on the literature, rather than finding out what that is and then leaping beyond it to get ahead of the literature, the more that we can speed up that, so that people can stay ahead of the pack rather than playing catch up, I think is the better. We are nearing the end of our hour on here. If anybody got any other questions or comments poking around in there, by all means, jump all in. And again, I had apologized for getting this show off like minutes beforehand with no warning on anybody. But it's been a juggling act to get up to speed on all the stuff that I was doing before. I still got a pile of information that I had accumulated while I was on vacation that I still have to plug in. And I definitely wanted to get the Beckley thing up so that would be out. I haven't gotten any notifications that anybody has commented on it yet, least of all from Beckley. And not that many people had seen his video, by the way. It was only like 400. Old Scratch says, do we know how much, if at all, interbreeding between the early hominids influenced what we now call race? Probably very little, because so much of what was going on wasn't affecting the surface details. Most of that is just skin tint and a little bits on different kind of hair formats and all that. And then, of course, there would be little micro details on which particular MHC molecules that we use for sexual attraction and all of that are popping up. But a lot of that racial characteristics seems to be relatively recent. There was, I think, the blue-eyed, in fact, someone was asking about this on Twitter, so I was checking up on the material on it, that the mutation for blue eyes in Europeans was apparently a single event that took place about 50,000 years ago. Well, that's way after our species developed. That's already occurring as a subgrouping. So that made 50,000 years ago is almost 10 times the age of the universe in young Earth creationism terms, but it's relatively recent in terms of human evolution. And by 50,000 years ago, the Neanderthals are about ready to check out. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on in there. Now, looking below the racial divide to look at the biochemistry of things, now then you start seeing those interesting little nuggets of Neanderthal and Denisovans knocking around. And in many respects, I think that's far more relevant than the superficial racial characteristic things. It's the metabolisms, the progenitors for certain kind of diseases, or certain connections as to whether you might or might not be able to survive drinking cow's milk or not, and that these have had long-term effects upon why people live in certain areas and why certain cultural traits developed in certain animal symbioses, and then the cultural traits built upon them, and why you eat beef in certain areas and not in others, that probably have more direct impact without you noticing them than the superficial thing that I'm pasty-faced white, creamy colored by comparison to somebody who is from Nigeria, and the realm of just happenstance of that. In this particular era that we've got, there's a big kerfuffle, as usual, over the genetics of human beings and how much is genetically determined. And that gets notion that the old school of this was that, well, this was genetic determinism, and that if there's any racial characteristics involved, that this is bad for things. But the regular scientific community has done a pretty good job of being able to tell the difference between what is a superficial detail and other things, and how much. The upshot is that most of the things that we get embroiled on about racial characteristics are superficial details that people are blowing way out of proportion, and are far more about the prejudices of particular socioeconomic or cultural groups, and nothing to do with the genetics of the particular component in question. So let me look farther down on here. Oh, another one. I'm going to have to look at all. I've got research to do. That's always the fun stuff that I have when I vet Jackson Wheat's videos, is that I keep on finding out a pile of stuff that I didn't know before, and sources that I need to add in or check against the data field. Let's say, yeah, why am I not? Keep on looking at, oh, okay. Boop, boop, boop. And let's see if there's any little bits on the, just curious, AJS asked if I've read the Earth's Children series, Clan of the Cave Bear, Valley of Horses. No, I've heard about them. And I guess one of them, the Clan of the Cave Bear, was made into a not terribly good movie some ways back. It connects up with the whole, what was the paleoculture of human beings issue. And that can often get you into delicious quagmires of who you're working on. I'm not sure how this plays up I can't remember the name of the woman that did the series, so forgive me on that a bit. But like, if you look back farther with 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that era, that the issue was, were humans made the way we are because we were violent? And so our violence characteristics, and that's why we triumphed over that. It turns out it's probably way more complicated than that. And they keep on discovering all new things all the time about how many trading networks were going on, not only in humans, but also in Neanderthals. And that things were probably more complicated than we like to make out. I'm definitely of the view that the human mind was functionally in place early on in human species, but it didn't manifest itself effectively until certain chance occurrences take place. And that's why we had such a slow bang on art representations. And you would periodically have probably the super genius Marie Curie, Leonardo da Vinci types popping up in all the way through human history. But most of the time they get hit with a rock or something bad happens and they don't have much of an effect on things. Only later on do you find an acceleration factor as you start developing first settled agriculture, so you can have specialization in a way that you didn't before. And now you can have the equivalent of the bookworm who can be studying stuff that doesn't necessarily imply the ability to survive the moment. And then civilization starts building up more and more and more. And stupid stuff too, because you get weird religious cults and all that kind of stuff. But that comes with the territory of making up stuff and figuring out what things are. Immutable Destiny says, Jane M. Owl, thank you very much, on the author of those books. Yeah, so I plead totally ignorant on those works. Immutable Destiny was asking, epigenetics arguably plays more of a role in evolution than genetics itself. I won't go that far, but it certainly is one of the things that affects things, because the actual structural genes remain relatively stable. But what changes them is their regulation, how they're deployed, and epigenetic markers alter that as well. And that's how short-term, air quotes, Lamarckian effects. I've got a little section on epigenetics matter in, I think, tip 1.4, somewhere around in there, that kind of keeps up with that little issue. And then it pops up in other areas. So epigenetics is another one of those that's been around conceptually for quite a long time, but it does tend to get a little bit overplayed at stages. There are limits to how long epigenetic markers can be kept in the field before they get wiped away. And there's whole mechanisms in the system that are designed to clean those away. So it's a dance. And it's also a dance that plays a role between maternal versus paternal epigenetic markers. And so it's squishy complicated. But I won't go so far as to say that it necessarily plays as big a role as the ultimate genetic structures of things. I'll just say that we don't know enough yet to be able to make that measurement. So we are after 6 o'clock on the hour. I'm winging it on my own here and a little bit late on the uptake here. So I apologize for any clumsiness that's going on that, and my occasional coughs and the like. I'm an old fart. So thank you all for showing up, and thank you for the comments and questions. And I got links and stuff to look at. I like the two-way feedback on that. Keep telling everybody about the project. Can rattle for tip if you can help the project. Please do so. I got a number 188 just today of supporting the project. Are there only 188 people on the planet who think my ideas are worth a while and the project is worthwhile to help out? I'm hoping there can be more. Still that $5 challenge, where lots and lots of people together that are in networks of thousands, they could all do just a quickie little buy Jim, RJ, a cup of coffee equivalent. That'll work. That hasn't happened yet. But at the very least, get evolution slam dunk. So Brian Stevens, another good show. RJ Later's all. Thank you. Good night, guy AJS. And now I get to eat my food and do all of that. Thank you very much. Stay warm while I get to turn the heater back on. I turned it off in the space heater here. I've been rationing fuel because it costs like 400 plus a pop at the price of oil. I got to get a minimum of 100 gallons. So I'm just kind of winkling along, but I got an electric blanket and I got the space heater in the bathroom that still works. And after all these years, and dear Justin bought me a little space heater that as a gift. So I'm muddling along here. And I'll put on more clothes than that. Malik, what is the project? That's TIP, Troubles in Paradise, the methodology of creationism, the tackling anti-evolutionism at the source methods level. And it involves pinning down the scholarship. It involves engaging in all social media, in debates, in other contexts, and not letting any anti-evolutionist or other woo go unresponded, and up the game of everybody to make our side as efficient as possible. It's a methods-based approach, source methods. It's a universal toolkit. I hope it's fun and interesting, because I know in my own experience, I know so bloody more than I ever did in high school or college even. And that I've got now the toolkit, and I display it all the time. The best question you can ever put out to anybody is, immutable destiny, let Aaron Ra know about me, and bring it up to him. I can't do it because that's just me saying I'm important. That goes without saying that I'm going to do that. But if some other people, if you think it is, let him know, and let him know on that. Anyway, there's the circumstances of things. It's a source methods approach. The most useful question you can ever ask anybody and yourself is, oh, gee, how do you know that? And how did you fact check it? What are you relying on? And everybody that uses rigorous reasoning should be able to defend their source base and be proud of that source base and their checking methods. And you'll find that people who believe things that aren't true fail at that miserably. And you will hear them either going silent, you'll get the deer in the headlight look, or they'll be grumping and declare victory and run off without ever actually doing anything. So that's the brief discussion on that, Mikhail. And I'm plugging away at it. It's a long-term work in progress. I'm doing things now that I hadn't done before, including videos. Hit me up on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, I pick my brain. If you have, the only time a Twitter thing might not get through to me is if it's done when I'm asleep, and there's such a backlog that I miss it. But once I'm up and actively tweeting, then fire it away, and I check my things constantly, and I will answer all. So there we go. And hopefully, AJS, I will not be ever accused of playing pigeon chess. Okay, so until next week, when we'll be discussing a bit about the Beckley thing, and then that'll be the preparatory for the debate with Standing for Truth. And then I'll be keeping at it. There'll probably be another period towards the end of December because of the Christmas holidays and stuff that I'll be out of thing, and I won't be doing that. But I am able to keep up a little bit on things via the little smartphone thing. So there we go. You can teach some old dogs new tricks. So I'm acting as a live example that, heck, if I can do it, so can you. There's the last words. Okay.